Bill Roundtree is in studios, a financial expert, an entrepreneur, a speaker, and he also has a good backstory, very motivational. Good to see you, Will.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Alan.
So I know a little about your backstory, but let's hear it from you, and then we'll move our way toward the present.
Absolutely. So Will Roundtree, originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, Adam, just like everyone else, I was told go to school, get good grades, get a good job, house, 2.5 kids, all that good stuff. Found out that did not work for me. And so I went to college, was in my economics class for maybe a semester and a half. And I remember my econ teacher telling me, this information I'm teaching you will not help you to become rich. So I actually dropped out of college at that point. Went into the workforce, started working, was working at a warehouse, thought I was going to retire from there. I was there for about 7.5 years. And then one day on August 13th, they told us the company was sold to a hedge fund. August 14th, went in, changed on the door, didn't know what I was going to do with my life. Had dropped out of college, had no real skill set, but fortunately, I was actually introduced to something called network marketing in 2003. And so joined network marketing, didn't make any money, but the one thing that it taught me, Adam, was personal development. I actually started reading books like Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it really just taught me how to change my level of thinking. And so from there, I was working with a gentleman who was teaching me a lot just about business and entrepreneurship. He said, Will, we're building a team in Las Vegas. Would you like to go out there? And I'm like, absolutely. Had nothing else really going on, wasn't making much money in the network marketing organization, and didn't have any money personally at the time. So he actually loaned me $500. I took that, moved to Las Vegas, and quickly found out entrepreneurship and business is not easy. So got out there, found myself couch surfing, sleeping in my car. And then I would go to different libraries and internet cafes and started reading books, and going online, started to learn things about credit, about business, and learning how money works, who banks loan money to, and different strategies and different things like that. And so took that information, applied the practical application to myself, ended up, kind of starting not necessarily a business. I really was just going out educating people on the information because I saw what it had done for me. I was able to get my first vehicle without having to put down money on a car, because I always thought you had to put 20-30% down on a car. But when you have great credit, you don't put money down. Was able to purchase a house in 2012, 2013. Coming from Milwaukee, I never even fathomed owning a home, let alone coming from homelessness to being able to purchase a house. And so when I saw what the barometer of where everyone was losing at, it was about understanding how finance worked. And so from there, just started partnering with different realtors, doing free home workshops and seminars, and it just kind of morphed and grew. And I ended up writing my first book, Credit is King, in 2016, and it's actually one of the top-selling books on Amazon. And fast forward, the Cliff Notes version, we're here today. I've traveled the country. I've, 3-time selling author. I'm a TEDx speaker. I've worked and mentored over 50,000 people in person and virtually. I've helped probably, 2,000-3,000 small and medium-sized businesses get access to about $400 million in capital. I've partnered and licensed my content to different universities. So I've done a lot.
So I come from poor people, and there's an aversion to talking about money and to discussing finances. And they didn't even say career. They said job. Definitely. You got to work, you got to get a job. Everyone's got to have a job. Then never heard the word career, because that was like for other people, or somehow doctors and lawyers, but you're not a doctor and you're not a lawyer, so you got to get a job, And I realized a lot of it is a mindset. People talk about the haves and the have-nots, and these people from this side of the tracks don't have what those people have, and I go, it's more of a mentality, because I come from white people who were educated, but their mentality was bad with money, and it was weird, and we never discussed it. And I just got a job out of high school, and that was it. And I never thought about it. And then I realized it's where I come from. Like, they didn't talk about investments, flourishing, accumulating wealth, generational wealth. It was all just get a job, and the man's going to fuck you at some point. Like, that was all it was. And he's going to give you as little as possible, and you're screwed, but you try to get a job. Now, I'm thinking about it because I got to go get a colonoscopy in 2 days.
Okay.
And I realized there's certain groups that don't get colonoscopies because they don't want it, they don't think about it, they don't like it, they don't like the concept of a colonoscopy, right? So they go, a lot of people, men in the black community go, I'm not getting a colonoscopy because I don't want to. You know what I mean? And it creates a problem because then there's colon cancer and we didn't diagnose it early enough. And I wonder if it's the same in a weird way with finances, because I feel that way. I felt that way coming from where I come from, not in the black community, but certain communities have it worse than others where they almost just don't want to talk about it.
Definitely.
Or they don't trust it or something, like the colonoscopy. Like it needs to be done. They should be doing it. It's healthy and it should be discussed, but it's not.
Well, I mean, I grew up the same way. You know, I used to have this thing where I would say, in my family, we didn't discuss finances, money, credit, banking. All I was taught was to save money, but you can't save your way out of poverty.
Right.
And that was something that I learned. And as I've traveled this country and been working with people for over 10 years professionally, the thing that I've learned, Adam, is that the brain only knows patterns. So if we grew up amongst that where all we knew was, you know, eating syrup sandwiches, at least that's what we ate in my household, or poverty, or, you know, however one grew up when it came to the lack of, that's all you know growing up. You don't understand the difference between saving and an investment account. You don't understand the difference between an entrepreneur versus getting a job, because it's two totally different worlds.
Yeah, I used to describe my family this way. I would say, you guys are in SavingNickel mode. I'm in make a buck mode.
I like that.
And you can save all you want, but if you're just saving nickels, it's not going to add up. Get out of saving every nickel mode and get into make a buck mode. Like, meaning, don't be a defensive fighter, be an offensive fighter. Move forward. You're not going to be... You could beat Mike Tyson if you move forward. If you try not to get hit by Mike Tyson, then you're going to get hit by Mike Tyson, and it's going to be a short night. So, like, be in make a buck mode, which no one in my family ever got into because they were sort of fear-based. I realized they didn't trust themselves or the system or whatever it was, and maybe it was a situation of, look, they didn't have much money, they weren't much good at this, and it would have been kind of painful for them to admit that they were essentially failures.
Well, I think some of it came from the marketing from banks. You think about banks make money off of, you know, mortgages. Banks make money off of the backs of people putting their money into savings accounts. So if someone puts $100 into the bank lends out at least 90 of it. And they keep $10 of your money there, and you're making interest off of the least amount of the money that they keep of yours. Whereas someone like yourself or myself, who's an investor, we take that $90 from the bank that we can borrow tax-free, and we go make more money off of the person who saved the money in the bank. And so there's this conundrum of the difference of how money works. And I think that's what the biggest issue is. And that's really what my entire mission is to do, to help people to understand that, because in America, especially from a small business standpoint, we're in a very bad position right now financially.
Why are we in a bad position financially right now?
Well, I think a lot of it is that you have a segment of individuals who they're going to always know how to play the game. And then there's a segment of people who don't know how to play the game. And so what I, have kind of really just taken my entire career to do is to learn how to play the game. And my game is helping, that kind of helping America by fixing small business owners. That's really where everything lies at, because the American dream is really, it's the small business, because amongst having the small business, then that's where people are seeing where their wealth comes from. So whether you have a dry cleaner or you're running a Fortune 500 company, everything else in between, they're struggling. And so what I've done is I've created this thing called the SPV, which is a small purpose vehicle for assisting small business owners, small and medium-sized businesses, entrepreneurs, and showing them how to isolate their risk when it comes to, because that's the number one issue with small business owners. It's a lack of cash flow. And so if you have a person who is trying to become an entrepreneur, but they have their regular life expenses, they're essentially financing not only their life, but their business, and one of them is going to suffer. But it's because there's a lack of information, a lack of strategy, a lack of the concepts of how money works, because a person will say, well, let me try to save $20,000 to start this business, not knowing that you can start a SPV, again, a special purpose vehicle, which is an entity solely used to isolate your financial risk, where I can now go to the bank and borrow the $20,000. And so essentially banks want to lend to corporations. And so we got to learn how to separate ourselves.
It feels to me like there's a lack of this being taught at schools. I certainly didn't learn anything about this.
That's why I dropped out of college. They didn't
schools,
teach me.
but certainly before that, just nothing. I didn't go to college, but at junior high, high school,
Right.
not discussed. I think there's a problem, and I've had this theory, which is it's going to be hard to be taught the entrepreneurial spirit by people who don't have the entrepreneur spirit because they're high school teachers. Right. You know what I mean? And school teachers, everyone likes to talk like they're heroes, but all right, some of them are, maybe. But they're basically people who made a deal. And the deal was, I'm not going to work in the private sector. I'm not going to go out into the open market and may the highest bidder win. I instead am going to take a job that guarantees me $59,000 a year for the rest of my life. I can't get fired, and I never have to work in summers. And I get a ton of time off for spring break and winter break. And so you are de facto being taught by people who have dropped out of the system, essentially. Now, they're employed, and they pay taxes, and they're citizens and everything like that. But don't expect that person to try to talk to you. That person's not Mark Cuban. That person's a person that's taking $59,000 a year and security versus the unknown of hanging your own shingle and seeing which way the wind's blowing out there, because you could go bankrupt, you know, or you could have riches. But they said, no, I'm going to take this job. Why would those people be any good at teaching anybody the entrepreneurial spirit? They're the last of the they're as far away from entrepreneurial as you can get in our society. So maybe we're expecting too much. Also, they're not interested in that anymore. And I don't know I'm not sure who figures out the curriculum, but it's something that should be discussed and taught, and it just isn't.
I agree.
Also, when you hear about the union bosses and the crazy women that run the school union and the districts and stuff, they don't seem interested in any of this at all. And as a matter of fact, they don't like people who do all this stuff. They don't even like vouchers and private schools. They don't want any of this. They want big union government. Boom. We're here. We vote. We'll vote in the governor of California. He'll do what we want, and we'll sit on our asses and get paid the most we can get paid for the least amount of work.
Right.
So I don't know. We shouldn't be surprised that these people aren't teaching this to our young kids.
No, I definitely agree. But here's what I'll say what separates me and why I say what makes me the SPV guy, Adam, is that I'm teaching people how to structure their SPV solely for the purpose of real estate. So now we're isolating their risk, because here's the thing that I'm always saying to people. What is the one thing that everybody has to do? They got to live somewhere.
Right.
And a part of the American dream is homeownership. So now we're able to capture a wider audience of a net of individual who all wants to have some form of homeownership, because that also is what helps to close that wealth gap amongst individuals, business owners, and everything else in between. And so if I can show them how to mitigate their risk through the structure of the SPV, and we're going to have the bank put up the bulk of the money for that on both sides of it, it mitigates the risk from that school teacher, from that union worker. And because I do believe deep down inside, most people want to have side hustle or a small business, because that's one of the ways they're able to supplement their income. But everybody's went out there, they've tried everything. But the one thing that most people want to try, but they have very little knowledge about because of the risk factor that they think or that they assume that's out there, is through real estate. And that's what I'm doing, is showing people how to create these SPVs. Well, I help them create the SPVs through real estate to essentially give them automatic cash flow.
The interest rates are still pretty high, right?
So I'll answer that question, but I want to give it to you from a different viewpoint. So as an entrepreneur, I'm more focused on my return. So the interest rate is only, a calculation that helps me to predetermine what my ROI is going to be. So what we typically do, because we're setting people up with an SPV as a corporation, banks want to lend to corporations. I always say there's a loophole in the banking system that separates the individual from their, corporation, to where the bank is almost guaranteed to lend to them. So if we go and get a commercial loan on that SPV, the average interest rate is going to come in, especially with the lenders that, we source out, you're going to come in at about 9 or 10%, which if you go back and look historically in the 80s and 70s, if you had great credit, interest rates were 12 and 13%. So historically, they're still lower, but now instead of living in a house at a 9% interest rate that's not making you any money, what we're saying is hey, we're going to take that 9 or 10% interest rate and we're going to help you to make money from it. So now the rent or the income from that property is going to service the debt on that property, plus whatever you make in between is going to be your net profits. So we're showing people from a business standpoint on how to structure these.
Yeah, generational wealth, property. It's just, I'm thinking about my own family of origin and shaking my head,
Right.
because they didn't do a good job of that,
The generation before you?
Yeah, well, my grandmother bought 2 houses in the valley for like $10,000, like in the 50s.
Right.
But her daughter lived in one of them as an adult for free.
That can cause a problem.
Didn't pay rent. And then her daughter never bought a house because she was living in her grandma's free house with me. And then at some point, grandma died. And then my mom, as her daughter, moved into her house and sold the other house that got bulldozed, and then moved into a grandma's other house. And then she died, my mom, and now the house is owned by my stepdad. So I don't know what's going to become of it, but it's not very generational wealth passing down.
I agree.
And I, however, have like warehouses and things like that. And I will tell you this: I know nothing about finance or real estate, but I'm telling you, buy a warehouse, man. Buy a warehouse. It only goes up. You can always rent it out. It is a good business. Warehouses, or you'll use the hell out of it. Like I've had this warehouse for 20 years. I come here every day.
Right.
Like for me, there's an element of, investment is great, and rental property, all that income property, it's all good. But if you're going to buy something, use it. You know what I mean? Like if you buy a boat and you never go out on it, then I don't know what your plan is. But to me, there's an element of I want to use this thing. And I've just used the hell out of every warehouse I ever got. But what would you say to somebody who was just listening, who just went, okay, I used to say this to people all the time. I go, look, when's the best time to buy a house or property or anything? I'd say the second you can do it. The second you can do it, do it. And they'd go, well, maybe it's not a good time, whatever. I'd go, just do it. You'll figure it out, but you'll have something. And by the way, when you have something, you buy a warehouse and you pay $500,000 for a warehouse, and the warehouse is worth $3 million, then you get to go to the bank and go, I need a loan. And they go, what do you got? And I go, well I got $2.5 million worth of equity in a warehouse that I paid $500,000 for, and they will give you a loan.
So essentially, we're in the same ballpark, Adam. Here's where the average entrepreneur, average small business owner, because let's look at it this way. 9 out of 10 small businesses fail. And so why is that? Because they lack cash flow. And when you think about that business that is failing, they're struggling to stay open, they have nothing that they can use to stabilize their revenues. So even from the standpoint of you having a warehouse, if you're running a business out of the warehouse, but you own the warehouse, at least you can borrow against the asset completely tax-free to stabilize that actual business. Someone who has a dry cleaner, someone who has a bakery, a restaurant, they don't have that. You think about the McDonald's franchise. they're really a real estate company. What Ray Kroc did was he set up SPVs and said, hey, if you want to buy a McDonald's franchise, we're going to own the building and you got to rent from us. So now McDonald's has mitigated their risks. So now it doesn't matter how many burgers they sell or milkshakes, because they know that franchise owner has to pay that rent every single month. So what I'm saying is so we're going to take that small business owner who may be struggling, who's lacking cash flow, who's lacking operating capital, and we're going to say, hey, let's set up an SPV. We can eventually get to the warehouse, but let's go and buy some single family homes, some multi-families, because at least we can go and actually create the SPV, go and get lines of credit from the bank. And then what the bank is going to do, they're going to cover 80%. We're going to use the credit that we helped your SPV establish to cover your soft costs, or the 20% down payment. So now it costs you nothing to get into that property. The tenant is going to service the debt, which then in turn you can utilize that cash flow to pour back into your failing business or your struggling business or the business you're trying to get off the ground. And then in the event, if you are in a situation where the sky is falling or whatever the case may be, you can go back and borrow against those assets or that portfolio, going back to your scenario about borrowing against the warehouse, and you can do that tax-free. And so this gives them an opportunity to mitigate their risk, because again, that small business owner, they may not be able to operate out of that warehouse.